I've been on the street on and off. On my birthday, be 43 years.
This is Country. That's his street name.
My income is exactly $650.
And he can't afford to live anywhere but the streets. Public housing isn't an option.
He applied for KCDC housing, but he has a felony for the vehicular homicide, and KCDC with that felony just won't allow him to get housing at this time.
The Knoxville native admits his mistake and served 4 years in prison for the charge. But now he faces a life sentence on the streets.
I'm tired. I'm really tired of living this life.
And hundreds of others are facing the same situation.
It's just part of the way things are here in Knoxville. And that's just the way things are.
Every time we posted a story about homelessness on our Facebook page over the last 6 months, you told us exactly what you think of it.
How people see it is in some ways as complex as the issue is itself.
That we've developed what might be called compassion fatigue. We've gotten very frustrated that it doesn't go away.
If you've driven down Broadway near downtown Knoxville, you know homelessness is a problem. But what's really causing it? Is anyone doing anything about it? And how can we all help?
The most recent data shows more than 9,000 people in Knoxville received some kind of homeless services in 2016. But the number of people on the streets at any given time is constantly changing.
The number of chronically homeless people sits around 300. Those are the people who have been homeless for more than a year. The others are either acutely homeless, displaced by something like an eviction or a fire at their homes, or they are episodically homeless, who come and go from the streets. These categories are much larger and harder to pin down.
At any given point, 500 children in Knox County are homeless. Knox County Schools tracks how many students are without a home, and a spokesperson says the number has remained fairly static over the last decade.
Nearly 60% of Knoxville's homeless say they were born in Tennessee, and 35% say they have a job.
Before we dive deeper into the issue, some background. One thing most experts in Knoxville agree on, the problem has changed dramatically in the last 20 to 30 years.
If you go back to the late 80s, the early 90s, there was a lot of effort to make people comfortable on the street. Furnish soup and blankets, concern about where they would have bathrooms.
Dr. Roger Noe helped write the book on homelessness in Knoxville. His annual report marks the start of the modern effort to end homelessness in Knoxville.
In the mid-'80s, homeless camps were scattered from Broadway to buildings downtown to Western Avenue and a string of camps along the railroad tracks. Experts found homeless spread out across the city. Flash forward 30 years, and we find a much greater density of homeless in a small area near shelters along Broadway.
In 1986, the vast majority of the homeless were white men in their 30s to 40s. 43% of them had served in the military. Many had a drinking problem, but most also said they had a job.
And lots of them were on the move, transient. The total number of chronic homeless in any given month was 800.
Flash forward 30 years, and the profile of the homeless has changed dramatically. We are seeing a surge in the number of women and children on the streets, a spike as well in African Americans who are homeless. And another troubling statistic, the mentally ill. More than 60% report receiving some kind of treatment for mental illness.
The total number of chronic homeless doubled to 1,600. That's far greater than the overall population increase of the city, only 5% over the same 3 decades. But one big success, the number of homeless veterans, that is down to just 10%. One of the families dealing with homelessness in Knoxville is Micaiah Chicanos. She's 19 years old. She spent 7 years in foster care.
I think it was why it was so easy for me to be homeless, because I could just pick up and just run away. It's easier to run away than it is to deal with things.
18 and homeless, Chicano became pregnant.
I cried my eyeballs out. I cried for 3 hours. I'm not even gonna lie to you, I bawled my eyeballs out. Adapt or die kind of thing. That's pretty much what we've been doing, adapting or dying. We adapt because...
She spent most of her pregnancy on the streets, then brought little Noah into the world. Now she and 5-month-old Noah are looking for more permanent housing. Chicano wants his life to be a life worth living.
I'm just like, am I a bad mom? Like, I have to reassure myself sometimes, because It's harder. It's hard. You know, I don't want him to remember all this. I don't want him to remember us struggling so hard. I don't want him to remember us having to pretty much like bounce from place to place, because it's hard. It's hard on me dealing with it. I could only imagine, if he could talk, I could just only imagine the stuff that he's thinking about.
Experts agree a key reason more families are ending up on the streets is the loss of affordable housing. In the 1950s and 60s, the city leveled low-income housing east of downtown. It was part of a nationwide trend toward urban renewal, or remaking parts of downtown. The state also shuttered Lakeshore in 2012. At one time, that permanent residential care center treated more than 2,000 patients with mental illness.
People who work with the homeless say mental illness is extremely high among that population. They also report they see a lot of drug and alcohol use. Almost 60% report a drug addiction, and nearly 20% say they've had problems with drugs and alcohol.
If you're sitting out here all day and you don't have a whole lot to do, then you're going to find something to do.
Knoxville police officer Thomas Clinton has worked with the homeless in Knoxville for 3 years.
How are we bettering ourselves today? I don't make many arrests. I usually focus on getting them to assistance and getting them housed if we can. If they come back out here, they're right back in the same mess that they're in. It's like sending an alcoholic to a bar.
As of March, more than 800 people in the city lived on the streets. Clinton works in areas all over the city, but primarily under the bridge on Broadway near downtown.
They're looking for shelter just like anybody else would be. They want to be out of the elements if possible.
Clinton says his main goal is to get people off the streets by connecting them to groups that can help.
If I arrest them, they go to jail for a couple days, they're out, and guess what? They're still homeless.
Now here's some good news. In the first 3 months of 2018, 70% of the people who sought services for homelessness in Knoxville saw a positive change in their housing status. That's a 5% increase over the last year. This is from the Knoxville Homeless Management Information System. That database shows a daily snapshot of the homeless in Knoxville. It shows people returning to shelters after finding permanent housing is down 20% over the last year. And the average time it takes for someone who is homeless to find a home is 16 days, down more than half. So what's the strategy that's making the difference?
We looked at the data and we looked at what others had done and saw that it does in fact work.
Ahead, the one approach that the players in the fight against homelessness agree is actually working. Plus, why they say there's no one-size-fits-all approach to getting people off the streets. Jonathan Peake lives in Manvilla Manor.
Got your own microwave, your own refrigerator, and you have your own bed.
He graduated from Fulton High School in 2009 and played on 2 state champion basketball teams.
Even though I struggled, but I didn't drop out. I graduated high school.
After graduation and a stint in the Job Corps, he struggled to find a job.
I was staying with friends. I was going house to house. So we have a little nice garden.
Now, he's lived in the same place since 2011. He has a part-time job, a case manager, and a community to support him.
Without those resources and without those expectations, be honest, I'll be out there.
He's even working toward moving into his own independent apartment. And he says it's thanks to Volunteer Ministry Center and an approach to homelessness called Housing First.
Knoxville is all in on Housing First. That approach puts someone in a permanent home in the hopes that having a place to sleep will help them seek addiction treatment, counseling, and a job.
It has been absolutely as successful as we thought it would be.
Michael Dunthorne has worked on the city's efforts to solve homelessness for almost 2 decades.
And it's the stability of that housing that helps them resolve the other issues that had made them become homeless in the first place.
The idea was based on how that approach worked in several bigger cities like Seattle, New York, Philadelphia, and Atlanta. Today, every single state in the country has at least one organization with a Housing First approach. Manvilla Manor, a 57-unit permanent supportive housing development, opened in 2010. It cost more than $7 million to renovate that historic building, or close to $123,000 per apartment. To run it now, the bill is about $435,000 a year, or close to $635 a month per apartment.
For Jonathan, his 7-year stay at Manvilla is a typical one. About half of the people who live there have been there since it opened 8 years ago. The facility has several requirements. Everyone there must be experiencing chronic homelessness. They have to have at least a moderate disability, and they all pay rent based on their income. The minimum rent is $50 a month. Unfortunately, not everyone can get in.
You got to fit in that sweet zone where you don't make enough to be not eligible for the programs, but just make enough that you can afford what is available.
Minvilla includes 57 of the almost 400 units of permanent supportive housing in Knoxville. That breaks down into several programs targeted at different needs: veterans, homeless people, or people with various illnesses. The experts say those 400 units just aren't enough.
That's where we are really facing a critical shortage. We don't have enough housing.
Since Minvilla Manor opened 8 years ago, the city says it hasn't seen any new permanent supportive housing developments on that scale. Several smaller facilities opened, and the city has added money to an incentive program for developers who want to build affordable housing.
The city is not going to be able to just entirely fund a development on its own, but we can put resources in that will close gaps.
The city adopted a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness in 2005. Some of its goals: move people to housing first, stop releasing people from jail or mental health facilities directly to the streets, improve coordination between the groups that help, create more economic opportunities, and recognize homelessness as a challenge that affects the entire community. In 10 years, the plan didn't end chronic homelessness. Knoxville created a new plan to address homelessness in 2014, which echoes many of the same goals.
A theme of our community plan to address homelessness is that it is the community's problem, and it's going to take all of us to solve it.
Day-to-day life for the homeless can be summed up in a word: complicated. These two men have spent the last 20 years working to change lives on the streets.
Who you got out here with you?
They work with the publicly funded Knox County Community Action Committee. Since 1964, CAC has used federal, state, and local dollars to reach out to people on the street.
There's just not enough housing out here.
The given names for these two homeless advocates are Roosevelt and Carl.
Engage people, establish relationships with them, find out what their issues are, what their problems are, and go and find the resources to help them with their problem.
Street angels might be more fitting. Both have worked daily in homeless camps across Knoxville for 2 decades.
Well, for me, I love helping people. I've always been a people person, so I enjoy, helping the people that I can help, because there's a lot of people in situations where we can find ways to get them out of being homeless, and that's our job, is to basically do that.
They make up part of a frontline team trying to help people like Country.
If I could just get out of this situation, I wouldn't have no need for drinking. Most of the reason people does the drugs and drinking to live this life and to actually survive it. You gotta have something to take your edge off. When I was born, I didn't say I want to be homeless. I wanted to grow up and become a truck driver. But now I've been out here for so long, it became a part of my life.
I mean, he has a very low income, and with that income, it's really tough to find something where he can pay rent every month and afford to survive. So what we have to do at this point is find something that's out there that's affordable.
My income is exactly $650.
$650 a month.
Yeah, I get SSI and Social Security.
What would help you the most?
What would help me the most is if I could find something that I could afford, and still leave me enough to pay my bills and buy my groceries.
We need lots of housing to support people in his situation that's low income, and that just doesn't exist right now.
A couple years back, I knew every homeless person that was out here. Most of us was locals. Sure, we had a couple pass through, but now I don't know nobody like I used to. It seems like every time you turn around, you see 2 or 3 new faces.
There's a lot of things now that's going on that when we first started, you couldn't even imagine that it would be the way it is now. No, the problem has got a lot greater than when we first started.
It's not an easy fix.
It's not an easy fix.
making it a priority, because I think a lot of people are just not informed about, you know, what they see. They pass down here and they see all of that there, but they don't know that there's barriers to people getting income or getting into housing. A lot of people, if you go up and talk to them, a lot of this is mental illness. And then people see them drunk or whatever, but it ain't that they're just drinking to be drinking. They're drinking because they're covering up the depression. They're covering up, you know, things that have happened to them in their past. But really, until you get out here and get to know that these are people, they could be your brothers, they could be your sisters. You know, they're someone's mother, they're someone's father. You know, so these are human beings. They're not just faces that you see every day. These are somebody loves them. Appreciate you, man.
Okay, man.
All right, bro.
All right. Okay, man. Good luck.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a bleak picture, but that isn't stopping people in Knoxville from trying to help. What you can do to actually make a difference and what's not helping.
Where'd you get all these clothes from?
The challenge with all of this issue is that there are no simple soundbite answers of what would it take just to fix it.
Homelessness is a constant dilemma for the city and for the organizations who are working to help people find homes.
But what are you supposed to do about it?
It's so much better to contribute to the things that are going to help people long term than to just simply hand something out not knowing whether you're helping someone or not.
The organizations that do this work every day say the best way to make an impact is to volunteer.
It really gives a face to the experience of homelessness.
Bruce Spangler runs Volunteer Ministry Center. It's the group that operates Manvilla Manor and offers other resources for people without homes.
At the corner of North Broadway and 5th, those in need line up for a meal. Chili, greens, cornbread, and some cookies. A simple home-cooked meal to help those without one.
Yeah, we're doing good. How are you?
Two couples, Sarah and David Hetrick, and Kate and Roy McCullough, are volunteering with VMC. They're new to all of this.
You know, it's hard to hold the philosophy of bringing people up from the bottom and helping those who are less fortunate unless you do the work.
For Sarah Hetrick, as the plate is passed, it's hard not to see the fine line between those serving the food and those eating it.
A lot of people really are not given any opportunities, and they're just born into a situation where they can't get out, you know, and I get really upset about it.
Each new face, a new pair of eyes, revealing so much more than a downward glance on the street ever could.
I think I see a soul. There's a person there.
I see a person. I see a person that puts their pants on just like I do.
I see a heart and a soul, and, you know, there but for the grace of God.
These four understand some may question the motives, wonder why can't the homeless pull themselves up, fix their problems themselves. David Hetrick says it's not his role to judge, just to serve.
I mean, there might be some cases where people take advantage, but very, very seldom I think that's the case. And again, it's not up to me as a giver to determine that. I think the good Lord, you know, watches us and you know, he judges us on how we do that.
You just need somebody to help you. So that's all we're trying to do. It's not a great humanitarian effort. We're just trying to be human beings.
There are dozens of groups in Knoxville that work with the homeless, and every one of them needs help.
It's so important that we all work together because we know we don't have enough resources available. And so by working together, we can maximize every dollar and every volunteer hour that we have available to us.
People who work with the homeless in Knoxville recommend you volunteer with groups that are part of a network working with the city. They say that prevents you from causing more harm than good.
There are good-hearted and kind folks in our community who will go and pass out food, pass out clothing, those kinds of things for folks who they may see under the bridge or wherever. When they're doing that, that is not helping the homeless, quote unquote. Sometimes that when we are doing those kinds of things, it's mostly about us and not about them.
The experts always go back to housing when it comes to really making a difference.
We really shout from the rooftop that everybody deserves housing. Everybody deserves housing.
It takes the community looking at the whole thing and how can I do my part to give somebody a chance or to make a resource available to help folks get off the street.
Homelessness in Knoxville isn't going away in the near future, but people who made it out of homelessness say even making a difference for one person can help.
When I asked them the question, I said, what made the difference? What was the one thing that made the difference for you to get out of homelessness? Every one of them said a relationship.
They either didn't know where to go or they tried it before and didn't like it, and we're just trying to get them back.
I don't want no other person being the same road that I have.
You know, I want a home, something that I can lay my head down and say, I did this.